Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Josh Gerben Show. This is episode 31. And in this episode, we are going to talk about how to provide impeccable client service.
Welcome to the Josh Gerben Show, because law school didn't teach business.
I'm a strong believer that if you have good client service in your law firm, good things will follow. My entire practice is pretty much built on repeat and referral business, and that comes from providing great client service. And while the owner or the manager of a law firm might have a really good idea of how to provide client service, most lawyers are not taught this skill. So when you have other lawyers working in your firm, it is critical to make sure that you have the training and oversight to make sure that the client service is being provided at all levels to all clients. So I view client service as having two main pillars. The first pillar is, how are you making clients feel while you're working with them? And the second is, how effective are you for clients? So let's start with the first pillar, which is how you make clients feel while they're working with your firm. And this is so important because in any legal matter, there's no guarantees. If you've practiced law for long enough, you understand that things are going to go wrong. Things are not always going to go the client's way. And if the client feels like they're being taken care of, they're going to have much more grace with you when things aren't going 100%. And ultimately, even if things are going really well, if you're not making the client feel well, they're not likely to come back or do more business with you in the future. And let me tell you a story about this, because this happened to us in our firm. We had a really good patent attorney, highly skilled, drafted great patents, and actually got great results for clients. We got patents registered very rarely with much problem. The challenge? This attorney was terrible at returning emails and phone calls. He would let things go for weeks before getting back to a client. And I would field very distressed messages from clients saying, hey, I can't reach your patent attorney. He's not returning my calls. He's not returning my emails. He's not moving this forward, even though he was doing what he should have been doing. He just wasn't communicating that to clients. And I had 3 or 4 calls with this attorney saying, look, if people are calling me concerned about the work that's going on, it doesn't matter how good your work product is, they're never going to work with us again. And I was right. We had a few clients leave us and not come back. And I totally understood that. They were very upset with how this attorney handled their case from a communication perspective. The work and the legal work was impeccable, never missed a deadline, never had a problem, got the patent issued, but they didn't feel good during the process. So it didn't matter that we were successful for the client. All that mattered is we didn't make them feel cared for while they were going through the process. And ultimately, we parted ways with this attorney because despite my training, despite my prodding, he would not change his ways. And so it just wasn't a good fit for us, because in our firm, we believe that if you can't provide that client service, we're not a good place for you. So this is a really important lesson, because you can hire very skilled people, great attorneys, but if they're not good with clients, you have to keep them away from the client, right? If you're gonna have them in your firm, you have to say, okay, I'm okay with having this person here because their legal talent is so good and they're going to get great work done, but they are not going to be allowed to interface with the client if they don't know how to do it in a way that keeps the client happy and keeps the client feeling comfortable. Because even if they get the work done, and even if it's done even if it's the best work that anyone's ever done on a particular case, it's not going to matter if the client's not happy with how they're being taken care of. So how do we make the client feel really good when they're working with you? I have 5 things that I typically do in my practice that pretty much takes care of everything. It's really not rocket science, but it does take daily consistency. So the first thing is that all emails need to be responded to within 24 to 48 hours. All phone calls need to be responded to within 24 hours, a little bit quicker. For the substantive work you're completing, you should let the client know when the work will be done and keep that promise to the client. If the client expresses any concern or confusion during the representation, your response should be to pick up the phone and talk to the client, not to send an email, not to send a text message, but actually have a conversation one-on-one with the client. And finally, the 5th point is you have to have a great bedside manner. All right, so let's jump into each one of these and talk about it a little bit. The first is responding to emails within 24 to 48 hours. Now you may say, look, Josh, I could get an email that has a very complicated question from a client, and there's no way I'm going to be able to respond to that in a day or two when I have everything else going on in my practice. And you would be right. I can't do it either. But what I can do is I can send an email back and say, hey, Bob, I got your email. Great question. I'm going to look into it this week, and I'll get back to you by blank. So now Bob knows I've got it. He knows when he's getting a response, and he can take this off his worry list. Because just like you, the client has a lot of other problems going on. And if they know you're handling it and you've got it, no problem. The issue comes in when you've read the email and you're like, okay, I got this and I've got to get back to Bob. And 4 or 5 days go by and you've never let Bob know that you've seen this or you're working on it. Now, Bob has no clue whether you've gotten his email, no clue whether his matter is being cared for. And you can see where that would lead to a lot of concern. And this, again, seems super obvious. Got to return emails timely. But you would be surprised how many lawyers out there do not do this. I get complaints all the time from people that are hiring us that had hired another IP attorney that say, oh, I never get my emails returned. They never get back to me. It's really surprising, but it happens. You need to make sure you have systems and that you're consistent. So every time a client emails you, they know what to expect. If you only get back to them half the time, they're not going to feel good. If they know, hey, every single time I send Josh an email, boom, he's on it. He never misses a beat. You're their go-to guy, right? Or gal. So that's how important it is to just have this daily consistency with your email responses. Now, the second point is you have to return phone calls in 24 hours. Phone calls in today's world are a little bit more urgent. If a client's calling you and they're not emailing you, that indicates that's their preferred method of communication. Now, are there some times where I might respond to a phone call with an email? Sure. If a client leaves me a message and says, hey, Josh, I want to check on the status of my trademark application, and the answer is, hey, your application was filed 2 months ago, it's still going to be 8 months until we get it reviewed, I might send them an email with a little bit of more information about the process so that they can review it. And if they still have questions, we can schedule a call. So there's some times where I might respond to a phone call with an email. But if the phone call expresses any kind of concern or they're in a rush about something, I'm obviously going to need to return that call the next day by the next day. And if I return the call and don't get the client on the phone, then I'll typically follow up with an email and say, hey, I returned your call today. Here's some information or some answers to the questions you had. And if you would like to schedule a call for later this week, let's figure out a time. And it's just a very important thing to do, because if someone leaves you a voicemail or gives you a call, leaves you a message and you don't respond to that, it's going to feel awful and they're going to feel very uncared for. So you just have to be on top of it. And if for some reason you can't be because you're in depositions or you're in a trial or whatever, you need to make sure there's somebody else on your team that's getting your messages and responding. So our third thing here is, when you have a substantive project you're working on, making sure the client knows when to expect a draft of a letter, a draft of an agreement, or whatever it is, and meeting that deadline. Because sometimes legal work takes a couple of weeks, right? There's many projects we work on internally at our firm that might take 3 or 4 weeks to complete. And of course, most clients think that, you're going to drop everything and work on their project for 3 days and have it done. And that's just not possible. You have a lot of work in your system. You're going to get to their project in the order that it's necessary between deadlines or order received or however you work through things. And you just need to be upfront with people about that. And I find that even if I tell a client, look, this is going to take a month to complete. Some clients might say, I'd like it a little sooner and we can talk about that. But most clients are fine with that. They say, okay, great. I know it's going to take a few weeks and I'll expect to see a draft on March 1st or whatever it is. And then I'm very consistent. If we get to March 1st and for some reason we're not done yet, or even if we're a couple days out and I know we're not going to meet that deadline, I'll get in touch with the client and say, hey, I know I told you March 1st. We're almost done. We just need a few more days. And again, never a problem, but I've updated them. I haven't failed to keep a promise. And if you do that consistently with clients, again, no one's ever going to be concerned about where you are or why the work's not back to them because you've told them it's going to take a while. You didn't say, I'll get it to you in a couple of weeks, and then a month later, you still don't have it to them. A lot of lawyers will do that, and it's a terrible practice, and it makes the client feel awful and not cared for. So we don't want that. The fourth pillar is making sure you're picking up the phone. This is for the younger generations out there in particular who don't like picking up the phone. I will say this. We have young associates who I have to ask repeatedly to call people as opposed to email because it is just not something that generation prefers to do. And even, to be honest with you, I get away from wanting to pick up the phone and call every time because it does require more of mental energy to talk to someone on the phone than just to send an email. But the beauty of a phone call is you get the benefit of that interaction. So if somebody's concerned or they're not sure what's going on with their matter and they've left a message or they're sending me emails where they seem upset about something, if I call them and I say, hey, Sally, look, it's Josh Gerben IP. What can I want to talk to you about this. Do you have a few minutes? And of course, for some reason they don't, we set out a time, but we get on the phone and I say, look, I hear you're concerned about this. Let me talk to you about what's going on. Let's just figure this all out and make sure you're comfortable with our approach and what we're doing. And we can normally talk through things. And again, it diffuses any sort of narrative the client has going on in their mind about what's happening on your end. A lot of people don't trust lawyers. And so they might distrust what you're doing or not feel that you're moving it quickly enough for some reason or whatever it might be. But if you get on the phone and simply explain to them what's going on and do so with, we're going to get to in a second here, with a really good bedside manner, 9 times out of 10, you're going to resolve the issue. You're actually going to deepen the relationship with the client because now they trust you more that you've given them the call and explained everything to them. So when you email them in the future, they're going to know who's behind that email and they're going to understand what you're asking for or saying. And it just smooths everything over so much better. So picking up the phone goes a long, long way in today's world, and I recommend you do it more often. So the 5th item on my list is the hardest one to train, and that is having a good bedside manner. Number 1 through number 4, we can set metrics. We can say, are emails getting responded to? We can see that in our system. We can see if phone calls are getting returned. We can understand if we see an upset client, was a phone call made? We can look at all those things. We can train those things. The one thing I cannot train is how to have a good bedside manner with a client. And the best thing I can tell folks about this is think about it this way. You are the client's guide to a forest. When you are taking on a matter, you are standing at an edge of a forest, and you have to lead the client from one end of the forest to the other. And in this forest, there's poison ivy, there's sinkholes, there's lions, there's tigers, there's bears. You as the lawyer know where all of these threats are, and you know the path through the forest that is most likely to avoid the threats and get to the other side. Now, you'll never be able to guarantee a client that something's not going to happen in the forest because that's the practice of law. There's uncertainty. But you do know the path of least resistance. You do know the safest path through because you've done it before. You've done it many times before in many cases. So if you were about to enter a forest with a guide, what would you want that guide to say to you? You would want the guide to say, hey, this is going to feel a little scary, but I know a lot about this. I've been through this forest thousands of times, and here's the things we're going to do to mitigate risk as we go. Here's the things we're going to watch out for. Here's how I'm going to handle certain situations, and ultimately, I'm going to protect you. And as you go through the forest, as things are happening, the guide will point out and say, he might say, hey, you see that over there? Don't worry about it. It's far enough away, but we're just going to be aware of it, right? We're not going to let it get any closer. That tiger needs to be at least, a mile away, and we're not going to let them get closer. So we're going to go this direction. Or, oh, I see up ahead, we've got a bunch of poison ivy. We're not going to crawl through that. We're going to kind of take a little detour and go around. Yeah. So you get the idea. Like, you want to make sure you're very communicative with somebody. You want to keep those lines of communication open. You want to explain things with not legal jargon as you see them. So don't give somebody an email or a phone call and just start with all the jargon of the industry. Just say, hey, look, this is what, in very practical terms, this is what's happening. Here's what I think we should do about it. Do I have your approval to proceed? Or do you have any questions? And really take the time to listen to a client, answer their questions. And the more you do this, and the more you do this in plain English without jargon, the better your bedside manner is going to be. You just want to make someone feel comfortable. And you have to think about, if you were in a challenging situation and you had someone that you were relying on, what could they say or what could they do to make you feel more comfortable? Then you just have to do those things. All right, so that's my 5 tips to how to make a client feel good about the work that's happening in your firm. And I cannot tell you, again, how far that goes. Even on cases where we might have had an unsuccessful outcome for a client, we've gotten repeat and referral business from that client because we handled the case very well from a client service perspective. They understood everything we were doing. They understood the risk. They understood that risk came to fruition, and we did everything we could about it, but ultimately didn't go their way. And they felt comfortable enough about the work we did and the way we did it to come back and use us again. And that says so much about how a firm operates. And I hope you take these lessons back to your firm to make your clients feel as good as possible during the course of representation with your firm. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying today's episode of The Josh Gerben Show. This show is brought to you by none other than Gerben IP. Gerben IP is a trademark, copyright, and patent firm based out of Washington, D.C. We've been in business for more than 16 years and work with clients from all over the United States and the world. If you are a U.S.-based attorney, please know that we do accept referrals from attorneys and pay a 20% referral fee for the lifetime of a client that you refer to us. We work really well with firms that don't do IP work, but need to plug in someone that does for their clients. especially someone that's not going to do the other work that you're already doing. So if you need somebody to refer your IP work to, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is jgerben@gerbenlawfirm.com. Drop me a note. I'll be happy to schedule an appointment with you, talk about our referral program, talk about what we can do for your clients. Thanks again so much for listening. Now back to the show. So now I want to get into the second pillar of client service, and that is how effective are you for your clients? Again, seems pretty obvious, but there's two ways that you have to think about being effective for clients. The first is, are you getting clients the desired result? And the second is, are you being a good steward of your client's money and time? So the first part of this is, are you getting the clients the desired result? Now, again, seems very obvious that the better you are at your craft, the better the result is you're going to get for your clients. In the trademark world, I will tell you this. We see a lot of attorneys trying to become trademark attorneys because they think there's money in it, or they think it's easy to get clients, or they can go online and put a Google ad up and get a client. And our firm fixes a lot of bad work done by other lawyers. So the one thing I always encourage people is do what you're good at. The riches are in the niches, as they say. And the one thing about trademarks is if you come to me for a trademark matter or any question you have, I've probably seen it 20, 50, 100 times before, and I'm going to be able to solve your problem lickety-split, right? If you come to me with a will, a trust, or an estate, I will have literally no idea what I'm doing. But if I wanted to tomorrow, I could say, hey, why don't we offer wills, trusts, and estate work to our clients? We have a ton of clients. Why don't we do that? The reason I don't is because I wouldn't trust my competency in that area of law. And you might say, well, Josh, I know enough about this to do it. If you're saying that, you probably don't, right? The biggest thing about being a lawyer some days is knowing what you don't know. And I know so much about trademarks, and I know how complicated the area of law is, even though it seems uncomplicated to some people, that I would never go into another area of law and just presume I could do half the quality of work I'm doing on the trademark side. So even if a client comes to us and says, Josh, I really like you as a person. You've taken great care of me. You've done great with your first pillar, which is you made me feel really comfortable. I would trust you with anything. I would say to them, no, you do not want to trust me with anything. You should only trust me with your trademarks. That's the only thing I know about. I am a one-trick monkey all around. I do not know anything else. And so I'm very open with that. I'm very honest about that. And I would encourage you to really focus your practice on what you know and not try to take on all this other work just because you have the client. Look for good referral sources. Look for people that might pay a referral fee. Really develop those relationships. And you would be surprised how much your clients will thank you because they know they can come to you for that one or two things you're really good at and you're the expert on, and you'll have other people that you can bring in to help them with the other things that you don't do. So again, if you just focus on what you're good at, the chances are that you're going to get good results for your clients, and that's going to lead to happy clients, repeat clients, and referrals. That's what makes your world go round. Now, the second part of this is, are you a good steward of your clients' money and time? You say, well, Josh, what does that mean? I cannot tell you how many other lawyers I've worked with that are opposing counsel on a trademark case that are literally burning their clients' money. Okay? I will ask them to talk about settlement, and the response I will get is, well, maybe we'll talk about settlement once we get into discovery. Now, why do you think they want to get into discovery? Of course, now look, in some cases, maybe there's a legitimate legal reason, but the majority of times when I hear that, it's because the lawyer will earn more fees the minute this case gets to discovery, and they have to send us discovery requests and respond to discovery requests. That's where litigators make their money, right? And so if it doesn't get to discovery, the case isn't worth much to the lawyer. Now, do you think that's being a good steward of the client's money? Is it a good use of their time if they get deposed in discovery? No, of course not. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. And the lawyers that are doing that, many of them are at big firms, I believe are burning through relationships. And ultimately, that'll get found out. Could you get away with it for a while because technically you're being aggressive and actively pursuing a case for a client? Sure. But at a certain point, the client's going to realize, wow, this is ridiculously expensive, and they're not really watching out for my best interest. And I think that that's where you end up losing clients, right? And obviously, you might get a lot of money out of a case, but you could have done it for a lot less. There's another story I have where we were in litigation against a relatively large company. We walked in a room with 2 lawyers for a particular hearing, and they walked in with 11. Now, we were quickly calculating the amount of that client was spending per hour on all those lawyers. Did they need 11 lawyers? No, they did not. This was not a complicated hearing. This was nothing that required more than one or two people to attend, right? And if they had walked in with 3 or 4, we would have probably thought that was a lot. They walked in with like 11. It was absurd. And it's clearly just they're not being a good steward of their client's money. They're like, the client will pay this amount for this hearing, so we're going to let everybody bill hours for this and bring everybody and all that kind of stuff. I think that approach to practicing law is unfortunate, and you see it a lot when you're in a small firm going up against bigger firms. You even see it a lot in, when I'm working against other lawyers in other small firms, because they might have very few cases and they're trying to get money out of the cases they have. I just think that's a terrible way of doing the practice in law. I want to be a good steward of my client's money. I want to be a good steward of their time, because if I do a good job and I get good results for a reasonable budget, guess what? I'll get the next case. I'll get the next referral. And that's what I banked my business on. And we've been in business for 16 years now. So I just encourage you to be more cautious on those fronts. Help lawyers develop a better reputation, because we have a pretty bad reputation out there. And if you're really doing that and you're really saving your clients and you're telling your clients, hey, look, we could do this, but let me try this settlement discussion first and see how it goes. And then all of a sudden you get the case settled. You should just remind your client, hey, we could have done discovery here, but we didn't. So we probably saved you like $20,000, and at some point find a way to drop that into a conversation and just remind them. But I think that's something that's just so important and so overlooked in today's practice of law. All right. So just to recap, to provide impeccable client service, we really want to do two things. One, we want to make sure clients feel really well taken care of during the course of their representation. We want them to have all the warm and fuzzies that come with working with you. And the second is we want to get good results for clients, meaning obviously we want to work on cases where we know the area of law really well, and we want to be good stewards of their time and money. So I hope you found all this helpful. If you have any other client service tips, please feel free to leave them in the comments. And if you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify, please give us a rating and review. It helps other people, other lawyers find this podcast. So any ratings, reviews, comments, all that stuff, as I'm sure you know, drives engagement. Really helpful for your friends to find the podcast. And of course, if you want to go as far to send them a link to our podcast or our YouTube show, that would be amazing as well. Thank you all so much. I'll see you next time.